Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, December the 14th, 2020. Paging Dr. Biden, paging Dr. Jill Biden. Everyone's talking about Dr. Jill. She has insisted for years that she be addressed as Dr. Jill Biden. And of course, my joke is, Dr. Jill, I have a mole on my neck, which is getting darker. I'm not that kind of doctor. What kind of doctor are you then? Doctor of philosophy, doctor of divinity, doctor of dentistry, doctor of veterinary science? No? Oh, doctor of education. Well. Let's see. This is from the Daily Mail. This story would never have been written about a man. Backlash against misogynistic Wall Street Journal op-ed writer who called Jill Biden 69 kiddo and said her doctor title sounds and feels fraudulent. Joseph Epstein labeled the future First Lady kiddo in the piece published Friday. He wrote, "A wise man once said that no one should call himself doctor unless he has delivered a child. Think about it, Dr. Jill, and forthwith drop the doc." In the social sciences, calling oneself doctor is thought bush league. He adds, Dr. Biden holds a doctorate in education from the University of Delaware. During President-elect Joe Biden's 8 years serving as vice president, she was a full-time English professor at Northern Virginia Community College. Epstein's words sparked a fierce reaction online, with Pink, Deborah Messing, and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, rushing to defend her. Jill's spokesperson, Michael LaRosa, called the piece disgusting and sexist. What I was taught growing up was that in North America, at any rate, I know that it's different in Europe, but in North America, only medical doctors and doctors of divinity, such as the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., get called doctor. I know that there's a lot of women on Twitter who just insist on, doctor, yes, and then the name, or the name, comma, PhD. Or sometimes you see Ed D in these women's Twitter handles. It's too funny, really. So apparently Joe Biden has been wronged. Former White House photographer Pete Souza shared an image of Dr. Biden on a golf buggy, calling the piece ridiculous and misogynistic and adding, "The doctor is on her way." LaRosa said that the Wall Street Journal should be embarrassed to print it. He added, "If you had any respect for women at all, you would remove this repugnant display of chauvinism from your paper and apologize to her." As it turns out, Dr. Jill has 4 degrees. She has a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and, of course, her fabled doctorate in education. Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter, Bernice, tweeted, "Dear Dr. Biden, my father was a non-medical doctor, and his work benefited humanity greatly. Yours does, too." The View host Meghan McCain said, "I'm so sick of the way accomplished, educated, successful women like Dr. Biden are talked about in the media by misogynistic men. Beyond so sick of it." Accomplished, educated, successful women like Dr. Biden. Yes, she teaches English, no doubt remedial English at the University of North Virginia Community College. Such an august educational institution. So there's the beat up there in the Daily Mail. Tracy Connor in the Daily Beast. WSJ publishes op-ed bashing Joe Biden's doctor title by man without a doctorate. Oh dear. Epstein, who has a bachelor's degree and an honorary degree, goes on to write in a sentence dripping with derision that Dr. Biden obtained her degree from the University of Delaware through a dissertation with the unpromising title, Student Retention at the Community College Level, Meeting Students' Needs. I could point out that Samuel Johnson had an honorary doctorate, and he was and is to this day called Dr. Johnson because of his great erudition and wisdom. Epstein also seemed to put out that Jill Biden didn't have to pass an exam in Greek or Latin, and that she got her doctorate when she was in her 50s. The column left Epstein trending on Twitter, and not in a good way. Oh, let's post your L's here. The author could have used fewer words, just say, in my day, we didn't have to respect women. Chasen Butt Judge tweeted. Chasen, that's his actual name, Chasten. He is the husband of Pete Buttigieg, who ran for president this year. Some said that they were canceling their WSJ subscriptions. Some wondered about the size of Epstein's genitals. Yes, of course. And let's see, Epstein taught at, I believe, Northwestern University for quite some time. After this scandal broke out, all mention of him was removed from that university's website. John Nolte writes in Breitbart, we have some good news today. Beyond the rollout of the Trump vaccine, yes, thanks to Dr. Jill Biden, it is at once again okay for politicians to attack the media. And who do I have to thank for that? None other than Dr. Jill Biden, who, by the way, is not a doctor. She's one of those doctors with a PhD in something or other, probably something useless like women's studies or public education. The Washington Post just 3 years ago mocked the use of the doctor title. If you are not a medical doctor, Sebastian Gorka likes to be called Dr. Gorka. He gets his way only in conservative media, the headline reads. The Post then devotes hundreds of words of mockery aimed at former Trump advisor Gorka for using the title doctor. My feeling is if you can't heal the sick, we don't call you doctor. Bill Walsh, the Washington Post's late great copy chief, told the Los Angeles Times in 2009. Journalist Mark Oppenheimer, who has a PhD in religious studies from Yale, wrote a magnificent takedown of doctor usage in the New Republic in 2014, following the death of Maya Angelou, who had been awarded several honorary doctorates and preferred to be called Dr. Angelou. Dr. Angelou, yes, that is very, very funny. You will recall that on Friday, I was talking about the author Louis Ferdinand Céline, who was a doctor, but in a different way. That is to say, he had a PhD and an MD, and he never went around insisting that people call him doctor. But perhaps we'll hear this phrase, the word doctor, applied with regard to Sebastian Gorka in the future. What about one of America's most famous doctors, William H. Cosby Jr.? Was that his name? He went to Temple University in Philadelphia, and he never finished his degree. And he was given it because of his work in comedy or on television or whatever. And eventually, he got a postgraduate degree and insisted on being called Dr. Cosby. Didn't end up all that well for him, did it? A tweet from Lionel Media, and there's a clip from The View, and there's Whoopi Goldberg. It's difficult to explain what Whoopi Goldberg looks like now. That she shot a small animal and then gutted it and stuck it on her head, perhaps. But Whoopi seemed to be quite pleased with the idea that President Joe Biden would select his wife, Dr. Joe Biden, as Surgeon General. Yes. I guess she didn't know. She just assumed that Joe Biden was an MD. A very amusing thread from Matt Bramanti. Reading Joe Biden's ED executive position paper, i.e. Ersatz dissertation, which she wrote at the age of 55, and it's bad. And he provides the PDF. Keep in mind, at that point in her life, Mrs. Biden was a grown woman who had been married for a cumulative 30 plus years to various people. Quote, 3/4 of the class will be Caucasian, 1/4 of the class will be African American. The remaining seats will be filled with students of Asian descent or non-resident aliens, unquote. And Matt comments, what remaining seats, Jill? There's another quotation. Although there was strength in diversity as a classroom component, the lack of homogeneity in academic ability makes it difficult to teach to a single standard. And a further quotation, admission to the college is open to all Delaware residents who have a high school education or its equivalent, or to anyone who is 18 years of age or older and able to benefit from instruction. That's a big or, Matt says. The unique nature of the classroom allows for a complexity of problems as well. And Matt comments, this person expects on the basis of this effort to be called doctor. And again, many universities and colleges did not eliminate the freshman and sophomore years. Comment, no shit. Tell me more, doctor. With a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Americans were offered the New Deal, and thousands of dollars were put into federal emergency junior college funds. Yes, upwards of 2,000. The junior college adapted, much like it does today, to the needs of its students. This is a paper that purports to investigate why 2/3 of two-year college students fail to graduate. After Roosevelt's death, Truman, as the next president, created the Truman Commission. And a final quotation, by 1963, public and private two-year headcount enrollment stood at 850,361. By 1980, enrollment had grown to 4,526,287, approximately a 230% increase in student attendance. And Matt comments, very approximately. Yes, that's the sort of thing that, yes, I've learned seeing that people speaking on CNN in particular, and I look them up, and I always thought that one had to be rather smart in order to be awarded a doctorate of any kind, actually. And now it seems that there are many people in the United States with IQs that I would judge to be, say, 105 or even lower who have doctorates, particularly in education or African American studies. So let's see what the President of the United States has to say. And again, I'll give you the proviso, as mandated by YouTube, that Joe Biden occupies the office of President-elect, that he won the election fair and square, and anyone who contends otherwise is a conspiracy theorist spreading misinformation. Now, the fact is that the President of the United States is contesting the election results, and he has got a great deal of support on this. This is, to my mind, a news story, and thus I will report it as such. But keep in mind, I'm simply going to read the opinions or assertions made by other people, and they're not my assertions, but I will report on them nonetheless. Donald J. Trump tweeted an hour ago, just had a very nice meeting with Attorney General Bill Barr at the White House. Our relationship has been a very good one. He has done an outstanding job. As per letter, Bill will be leaving just before Christmas to spend the holidays with his family. Chuli opinion from the Washington Times. Forensic auditors find a shocking 68% error rate in one Michigan county's vote. Oops, big oops. In fact, the system was found to be, quote, purposefully designed with inherent errors to create systemic fraud and influence results, unquote. He links to a story in the Detroit Free Press, breaking: judge orders release of report examining Antrim County vote tabulators. He said the other day that we have only just begun to fight, and it's my very strong opinion that he is not going to concede, and I don't think he's going to be leaving the White House. But we'll get into the specifics of that just a little later. First of all, what did we find out today? Oh, we have dueling electors. Michigan, Lauren Witzke reports, is stopping Trump electors from getting in to cast their votes. She says this is pure evil at work. According to the Gateway Pundit, Arizona GOP electors joined Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania in casting votes for President Donald Trump. Michigan attorney responsible for forensic examination of 16 Dominion machines gets threatening call from Michigan State Bar. Radical Attorney General Dana Nessel threatens Michigan lawyers supporting Trump. And a story fully exposed the Dominion plot to defraud the American voters and President Trump. Once again, Biden won the election fair and square, and he occupies the office, the venerated office of President-elect. And yes, Michigan judge grants attorney, these are stories from the Gateway Pundit, Matt DePerno permission to release results of forensic examination on 16 Dominion voting machines in Antrim County. It has been claimed 68% error rate. And let's go to Jim Kunstler. His column today is called Offstage Noises. Friday night, the U.S. Supreme Court booted the Texas case against the swing state election janksters, the citation of standing, likely a cover story for another reason that isn't strictly legal doctrine, but rather a sentiment, namely that a presidential election dispute belongs more properly in the elected House of Representatives than in the elected Supreme Court of the United States, at least for now, with more cases probably coming at them. The justices didn't explain their decision. This wasn't so with Bush v. Gore in 2000, by the way, but we are a very different country now, one mired in institutional paralysis and failure, thanks to the bureaucratic resistance. Anyway, the Supremes wouldn't hear the evidence of ballot fraud, nor has any state court yet, so ignore the plaintive cries from the seditionist news media that claims of gross election irregularities are baseless. I'll have more on sedition in just a moment. Today, December the 14th, the 50-state electoral college slates meet to cast their votes. This used to be significant back when a discernible consensus about reality existed across this land. But now that e pluribus unum has been replaced by anything goes and nothing matters, the more consequential action will be shifting offstage and backstage. For instance, President Trump's 2018 Executive Order 13848 requires the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, to report 45 days after the election on foreign election interference. That's this Friday. What might Ratcliffe know? Well, supposedly everything, except that both the CIA and the FBI must be considered undependable now, with Russiagate prankster Gina Haspel in charge of the CIA and Christopher Wray slow-walking every requested declassified FBI document for years. So Ratcliffe must be receiving more dependable intelligence from others, most likely defense intelligence. Many readers may have heard about a supposed raid on the CIA cyber warfare station in Frankfurt, Germany, and the seizure there of the Dominion computer servers by U.S. Army Special Ops personnel. 45 days was probably enough time for defense intelligence to run forensic analysis on those servers, if, in fact, they existed and the raid actually happened. Standing by on that. We just don't know. But if so, then Ratcliffe must have some results by now. What nobody has asked, well, I've asked it, but in the first place, what on earth would the Dominion servers be doing in Frankfurt outside the USA in possession of the CIA? Is the CIA monitoring the vote tabulation or assisting in it? This raises another question no one has addressed. Well, I've addressed it repeatedly. Servers serve computer networks which operate via the internet. If Dominion vote tabulation machines all over America are not allowed to be hooked up to the internet, how can they be a network? And why would they need a server? If I'm missing something there, please discuss in the comments section, Jim Kunstler says. Which raises another question. Is there not sufficient evidence to see that the use of computers has completely screwed up our election process? Is this not a classic Joseph Tainter-style quandary of overinvestments in complexity, producing diminishing returns, which, when enough of them pile up, gets you to the collapse of civilizations? Are we going to allow further screw-ups by letting the state of Georgia conduct their January 5th Senate runoff on the same Dominion machines they used on November 3rd? Apparently, that's exactly what Georgia intends to do. All right, let's return to next Friday's report by DNI Ratcliffe. There's a lot of talk of strange intersections between the Dominion Company and foreign countries, starting with Dominion's ownership being based in Canada on the same floor of a Toronto office building as the George Soros-linked nonprofit the Make Way Foundation. Attorney Sidney Powell has current court cases alleging nefarious connections between Dominion, Venezuela, and China. Note, nearly all of Venezuela's oil exports go to China, and Iran has helped Venezuela develop capacity of its difficult-to-produce Orinoco oil sands. Does Ratcliffe have the same information that Ms. Powell has, and perhaps a whole lot more? Might China have any interest in favoring the election of Joe Biden over Donald Trump? Well, plenty of evidence has already been made public that Joe Biden is a bought and paid for asset of China. For example, a 2017 $5 million unsecured interest-free forgivable loan from China's Intel service-managed CEFC energy company advanced to sons Hunter Biden's Hudson West III front company, and emails stating how the split worked between Biden family members and a few outside partners. I would suppose that Ratcliffe knows a whole lot more detail about this and other Biden family business ventures in foreign lands, and that we may hear more about that on Friday. Perhaps even a declaration that Joe Biden is a security threat to the USA and as such disqualified from holding high office. That would kind of throw a monkey wrench into America's election proceedings, don't you think? I can't imagine that investigators have not been tracing the money trail through the various shell companies and laundromat banks that lead to Joe Biden's own accounts. What if the news media refuses to report on DNI Ratcliffe's Friday report? I have an idea, Jim Kunstler continues. We have an asset called National Public Radio, NPR. Lately, it has been a hostage to Democratic wokesters who refuse to report news that is unfavorable to the woke Democratic cause of destroying the public. In fact, when the Biden family crime story broke in late October, NPR's managing editor, Terrence Samuel, tweeted out, "We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories, and we don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions." In a national emergency, perhaps President Trump might fire Terrence Samuel's ass, along with the rest of NPR's top management, and use the network to bypass the seditious media and social networks to get actual news out to the American people. Just an idea. Let us go to the chat and see what is happening there. Jim Smith writes, the contender for most smug and obnoxious person in politics, William Bill Crystal, actually has a legitimate PhD from Harvard and almost never mentions it. Well, I have to say that I had been reading Tom Wolfe for decades before I discovered that he had a PhD from Yale. And he didn't insist on being called a doctor. I think he felt a little embarrassed by it. He once wrote that being in grad school was like being trapped in an insanely overheated railway car in Florida, listening to George McGovern explain his philosophy of government. Palcasso 88, hello, Dr. KMG. And hello to you, Walrus Libertarian, Wandering Spurg, William Hicks, Ben S. Jim Smith, read Kiddo. Let's not forget that Joseph Epstein is almost 84. Oh, yes, someone reminds me of Dr. David Duke, who I believe has a PhD in anti-Zionist studies from a Ukrainian technical college. That's a good one. Respect whammons, says Chogokin 666. Doctors who are non-medical doctors who insist upon being called doctor are cringe, says Emma Nimpton. LOL, says Jim Smith. She must have never read the Martin Luther King plagiarism story by Theodore Pappas. Yes, I have read that story. I'm well familiar with the fact that the sainted Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Plagiarized, 50% or more of his Doctor of Divinity thesis at Boston University. William Hicks, oh geez, the missionary misogyny card, the Warren women narrative returns, the Empire strikes back. Enron says she is more accomplished than her common criminal husband. Metal Mike says, if someone was having an emergency and they called for a doctor and Mrs. Biden was there, would that be like George Costanza's marine biologist moment? Yes. Or perhaps like that scene in Nurse Betty, where the titular Nurse Betty, who is not a nurse, but thinks that she is, actually saves a patient. Very bloody it is, but it's a very amusing movie, Nurse Betty. It's quite dark though. Okay, Chogokin 666. I'm a doctor of sexual proficiency. You may call me Dr. Sex. I obtained my doctorate at Brooklyn Community College. I think some university gave George Floyd a doctorate, says Wandering Spurg. Bob Paxson says Dr. Cosby prescribed the Rohypnol to himself. Palcazo 88, I'm reminded of the old joke from Married with Children. Marcy asks Al for a contraceptive, and he gives her a magazine with Whoopi Goldberg on the cover. Whoopi Goldberg and Ted Danson. Are any of you old enough to remember that? And the speech that he gave, the humorous speech about, going out with a black woman and what would it be like if they had children. And I'm not going to repeat any of it because I read the text of it in Spy magazine, and I could hardly believe it. And keep in mind, this was 30 years old or something like that. I mean, there would be nothing left of Ted Danson if he gave a speech like that today or any time in the last, say, 10 years. He'd have to flee the country before he was murdered. Jim Smith, and as he's a new and zealous Biden supporter, I've yet to see Crystal comment upon the Epstein controversy, though Epstein wrote for him and was admired by him. Let's see, Matthew Carpenter, GOP just grifting at this point. We're fighting for you. Matthew Carpenter again, take Peter Hitchens' advice from the 2010 election and sink the GOP so a proper right can form. I think it would be a better idea simply to take over the grand old party. All of the cucks, can be primaried because what they have to offer, it's not popular. It's simply not popular. Vote for me because I'm a Republican. What have you ever done for us? Something abortion? You haven't stopped one abortion taking place, but we might in the future. Also, capital gains cuts. I mean, Joe Average he's just obsessed with capital gains cuts. Is he not? Bob Paxton says, I'm concerned about that white floor lamp. I think it's getting closer to KMG. Bob Paxton again, NPR is not an asset. NPR is not government run, says Urban Planner. Who is this Kunstler guy? He is a journalist, a novelist. He writes a lot about architecture and urban planning and the coming death of suburbia. Actually, all of MLK's major speeches were plagiarized, if I recall. Yes, they were. He was also an aider and abetter of rape and a compulsive orgiast. Palpcasso 88, KMG, are you a fan of Robert Altman? Not so much. Not so much, actually. There's good things in some of his movies. Hickman Warrior says MLK's speeches were written by a certain Davison. Okay. And let's get back to it here. Let's see what J5 Color has to say. He quotes Intel Dog. U.S. Senator Rob Portman, Republican of Ohio, has released a statement following the Electoral College vote. And although I supported President Trump, the Electoral College vote today makes clear that Joe Biden is now president-elect. J5 Killer comments, the cucks, traitors, and losers are all unmasking this afternoon. Hubert Hammer Q tweeted, I can't wait to see them cry like they've never cried before when this election reverses. J5 Killer liked that one. The Columbia Bugle, they're not even trying to convince you. They just want you to shut up and accept it. And finally, Kanakawa, the Great, tweeted, the evidence for Russiagate was a Clinton-funded dossier fed to an ex-British spy by a Clinton associate. And the evidence of election fraud, he asserts that it is much more than that. But remember the official policy. Now, yes, let's talk about collusion versus collusion. The Peace and American Greatness by Victor Davis Hanson. He begins, historians will dissect the origins and spread of the mass hysteria of Russian collusion. The farce infected the media, it discredited the Democratic Party, and it warped the popular culture between 2015 and 2020. Collusion destroyed what was left of respect for the Washington FBI, the CIA, and the liberal news media. When 50 former intelligence officers can attest right before the election that the Hunter Biden scandal emails are likely Russian disinformation designed to help Trump, there is nothing much left of the reputation of our once best and brightest. There are many theories of the origins of collusion. Some believe that Hillary Clinton and her firewalls of the Democratic National Committee, Perkins Coie, and Fusion GPS that hired Christopher Steele simply sought a cover counter-narrative to hide her own illegally transmitted and received State Department emails and spin-off scandals. At the time collusion took off, Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton were on the tarmac in Phoenix. Sexual deviant Anthony Weiner's wife was emailing with Hillary Clinton, and copies ended up on Anthony's lurid laptop. The hacked DNC computers and all proof of supposed Russian collusion culprits had been mysteriously turned over by the FBI to the Clinton-friendly firm CrowdStrike for recovery of lost files. There were other catalysts for the collusion mythology. By 2015, Democrats were embarrassed the Russian reset love fest had blown up in his face, finger-wagging about human rights to a thug like Vladimir Putin, while being terrified of selling offensive weapons to the beleaguered Ukraine was a talk loudly while carrying a twig prescription for disastrous humiliation. The left-wing architects of reset in their arrogance went from we can push the weak hand of Putin to Putin is an omnipotent monster in less than a year. In 2012, they acted as if they were Alger Hiss. By 2016, they were in full Joe McCarthy mode, hunting for a Russian under every bed. Putin, in his mafioso-style thinking, had kept his part of the reset bargain. He had stayed inert in 2011, as promised in Seoul, South Korea, to aid Barack Obama's re-election campaign. And in collusionary return, as also promised, Putin got missile defense in Eastern Europe scrapped, and as a bonus, a free hand in Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. He goes on to, this is quite good, I have to say this. Collusion was, as the debased FBI agent Peter Strzok had texted, the insurance policy of the administrative state to keep the smelly, the ugly folk, and the dregs where they belong, far, far from power. Yes, he actually used those words, smelly, ugly folk, and dregs, to describe Donald Trump voters. Collusion took off because so many of those directly involved in its illegality, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, and Hillary Clinton, pushed the collusion lie in roles of respected senior wise men and women with security clearances who knew what was really going on? And then he goes on to compare Russia with China and argues that China is a far more powerful country today and one which represents a far greater threat to the United States of America. Nonetheless, Hollywood has had a field day with casting big screen, shaved heads, orthodox tattooed Russian mafia killers, and brutes as the evil enemies of all noble minority and feminist film heroes. Yet at the same time, progressive studio heads and producers were reassuring the 1.4 billion people in the Chinese market that they would cull darker-skinned minority American actors so as not to offend the innate racism of the Chinese moviegoer. No one said a word about the paradox. And then he goes on to mention ask the question, the diverse group of movers and shakers such as Michael Bloomberg, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Representative Eric Swalwell, the elite universities of the United States, the family of Joe Biden, LeBron James, and Colin Kaepernick all have in common. Easy. A presidential primary candidate assures us that China is not an authoritarian country as he pours billions into jump-starting Chinese companies. The erstwhile head of the U.S. Senate's Intelligence Committee had a Chinese spy as her chauffeur for 20 years and a spouse who has millions in joint Chinese ventures. And yes, there's the disappearance of the rare earth mining industry in the United States, which was the direct result of interference by Dianne Feinstein. And guess whose husband was interested in getting in that business with the Chinese? Yes, that would be Dianne Feinstein's husband. But I'm sure it is all a coincidence. How about sedition? These people are always projecting, always projecting. We heard about the Transition Integrity Project, the TIP, going back to summer, where pretty much what happened was laid out. But now we're hearing them throw around this word sedition. Ryan Cooper writes in The Week, let's review two pieces of news from the last week. First, the American coronavirus pandemic is entering its worst stage yet, with cases and deaths skyrocketing across the country. Last Thursday saw over 3,000 deaths, more than 9/11 or Pearl Harbor. Yeah. I think one of the reasons why 9/11 remains so notorious is it was the result of an attack, a military attack against the United States. People dying in singly in ICU wards is obviously not going to have the same effect. But let's do a little arithmetic here. About 3 million people die every year in the United States of various causes. And there are 365 days of the year. So that means, on average, about 8,200 people die in the United States every single day. And yet, because people like our essayist here, Ryan Cooper, are incapable of doing simple arithmetic, they have gaslighted us into thinking that this is the greatest catastrophe in the history of the United States. Oh, material conditions, he writes, in this country have not been this bad since 1932, at least, and the political situation has not been this bad since 1860. So perhaps they could reanimate General Sherman, and he could march to the sea again against the deplorables. It's worth thinking about what a party seriously committed to preserving democracy would do when faced with a seditious opposition party, namely cut them out of power and force them to behave. Democrats could declare all traitors ineligible to serve in national office, convene a patriot Congress composed solely of people who have not committed insurrection against the American government, and use that power to re-entrench democracy. Let's review the bidding here, as David Mamet would say. Even before Donald Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017, there were calls to impeach him. For what? He hadn't done anything as president because he wasn't president yet. Most of the media, academia, big business, they said that Trump was an illegitimate president because he had stolen the election at the behest of Vladimir Putin. And they pursued this narrative for years. And yet, when it comes from the House, time for the House of Representatives to impeach Donald Trump, and on their indictment, there's no message of Russia. Oh, and thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people claimed to belong to some sort of organization called the Resistance. That all sounds very seditious to me. The reasoning here is very simple. All members of Congress swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, which establishes a republican form of government. The whole point of a republic is that contests for power are conducted through a framework of rules and democratic elections where all people agree to respect the result, whether they lose or win. Yeah, that's what they call a liar's charter. Because if no one is allowed to complain, then there's no limit to the amount of fraud that could be perpetrated. But they always accuse their enemies of doing what they are in fact doing. In other words, this lawsuit, that would be the Texas lawsuit, even though it didn't succeed, is a flagrant attempt to overturn the constitutional system and impose through authoritarian means the rules of a corrupt criminal whose doltish incompetence has gotten hundreds of thousands of Americans killed. So how does it, the United States compared to, say, Germany or Britain or many other such places? Andrew Cuomo, who has now been accused of serial sexual harassment, his state has the worst numbers in America. And he's supposed to be the opposite of Trump. He's supposed to be the anti-Trump. You simply cannot coerce a virus. It can't be done. But we're going to keep hearing this. And when is this insanity going to end? Well, let's see. I'll talk about that a little later. A piece from Michael Fumento. Charles Blow, who is one of the most obnoxious columnists for the New York Times, writes, Trump has never believed in democracy. I guess that's why he ran political campaigns. Going to the Supreme Court for an adjudication does not strike me as the sort of thing that an authoritarian would do, especially when said person is commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. Donald Trump's continued effort to overturn the result of the election, effort buttressed by the support of many Republicans in Congress, should be noted, is nothing short of an attempt at a bloodless coup. Yeah, who started a coup first, going back to 2015? No, it's outrageous to suggest that the Obama administration was surveilling Trump's campaign. Outrageous to suggest that FBI agents were instructed to try and get Trump supporters in perjury traps. Yeah. And yet on Saturday, Trump continued to insist on Twitter that I won the election in a landslide and that Supreme Court ruling was incorrect. The next day, Trump flew over a Stop the Steal rally at Washington's Freedom Plaza, where the Proud Boys were a prominent presence. Ooh, the Proud Boys. It's not like Antifa or anything like that. You know, the Proud Boys. They're just despicable. And what are they? Trump's SA? Are there hundreds of thousands of them? But I guess the New York Times is feeling in a good mood. In a good mood. Let's see how long that lasts for. Here's a particularly pompous story from the New York Times. How do we get to herd immunity for fake news? This is by Greg Weiner, who teaches at the University he's from Nebraska. Okay. But yeah, it's we never do anything wrong. We never do anything wrong at all. It'd just be outrageous to suggest otherwise. It's Trump. He's the one. He's the one that's done everything wrong and continues to do everything wrong. They've been talking about a revolution in the United States since 2015, and the talk of a coup, an actual military coup, was talked up by the American media as early as 2017. That the wise generals at the top, they had just got sick to death of Donald Trump, and they were not going to give him any more leeway. And if he insisted otherwise, well, then I guess the tanks would roll up to the White House. Here's something that I don't know. Maybe it's connected, maybe it is not. This is from Sky News, Australia. A major leak containing a register with the details of nearly 2 million Chinese Communist Party members has occurred, exposing members who are now working all over the world while also lifting the lid on how the party operates under Xi Jinping, says Sherry Markson. Markson said the leak is a register with the details of Communist Party members, including their names, party position, birthday, national ID number, and ethnicity. It is believed to be the first leak of its kind in the world. What's amazing about this database is not just that it exposes people who are members of the Communist Party and who are now living and working all over the world, from Australia to the US to the UK, Markson said, but it's amazing because it lifts the lid on how the party operates under President and Chairman Xi Jinping. Markson said the leak demonstrates party branches are embedded in some of the world's biggest companies and even inside government agencies. Communist Party branches have been set up inside Western companies, allowing the infiltration of those companies by CCP members who, if called on, are answerable directly to the Communist Party, to the chairman, the president himself. Along with the personal identifying details of 1.95 million Communist Party members, mostly from Shanghai, there are also the details of 79,000 Communist Party branches, many of them inside companies. I'm just sure it's a coincidence, an absolute coincidence. Let's see what Vox Day has to say. Breaking news. And Joe Biden is president-elect as California puts him over the 270 mark, and he will address the nation saying it's time to turn the page despite Donald Trump still not admitting he lost. Vox Day comments, there are now dual sets of electors for Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. The media isn't covering this for the most part, and they wouldn't know how to cover it, what it means, or how it plays out, even if they did. But this should assure you that the president has matters well in hand and that everything is playing out according to his plan. On a not necessarily unrelated note, Bill Barr has resigned as the Attorney General effective December 23rd. I told you there would be a surprise today, didn't I? Boasts Vox Day. You may recall that just this very situation was addressed yesterday. Quote, there's a very strong constitutional theory that the power to open and count the votes of the presidential electors is vested exclusively in the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate is actually the Vice President of the United States, Trump's running mate, Mike Pence. Therefore, if this theory is true, Mike Pence can simply open the Republican certificates and toss the Democrat certificates into the trash. The Democrats could howl and shout and gnash their teeth, but they cannot count votes that Trump doesn't open. And this fellow makes legal arguments at length. Don't forget the outcome has already been assured by no less than General Michael Flynn himself. First of all, there's a whole number of paths that the president has, and like I say, asked on a scale of 1 to 10, who'll be the next president, I'll say 10, Donald Trump. I'll tell you one more time, because I've been asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, who will be the next president of the United States, and I say Donald Trump, 10, a 10. Oh, I wondered why Chris Pratt was trending. Marvel has confirmed that Chris Pratt's Guardians of the Galaxy character Star-Lord is a polyamorous bisexual. Has anyone told Chris Pratt about this? Oh, and this was going around the internet today. This is being reported by multiple sources. President Trump to pardon Julian Assange. I'd certainly like to see it. I'm not counting on it. The forensics report of the Dominion voting machine for Antrim County, Michigan has been released. The news is worse for Biden than we had expected. Some of the conclusions. The allowable election error rate established by the Federal Election Commission guidelines is of 1 in 250,000 ballots, which is 0.0008%. We observed an error rate of 68.05%. This demonstrated a significant and fatal error in security and election integrity. Significantly, the computer system shows vote adjudication logs for prior years, but all adjudication log entries for the 2020 election cycle are missing. Likewise, all server security logs prior to 11:03 p.m. on November 4th, 2020 are missing. Other server logs before November 4th, 2020 are present, therefore, there is no reasonable explanation for the security logs to be missing. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Let's try to keep a sense of decorum here. Remember, as I like to say, this is my good taste YouTube live stream. I wonder if Princess Rockstar is on that list, said Palcazo 88. I'd rather doubt it, actually. I'd rather doubt it. I should think that there are going to be a lot of prominent Canadians on that list. A lot of prominent Canadian businessmen to start with. And people are angry with Bill Barr. Anron says they get to run the country without consent and without, it seems, really breaking a sweat to do it. Virgil Doc Purple Heart says, looks like you are laying in a coffin surrounded by flowers. Rather bright for a coffin. Okay. Fumento's myth of heterosexual AIDS is a classic. Indeed it is, and I interviewed him several times about that book and other things to do with HIV, AIDS. Hickma Warrior says Hunter Biden does seem to have the aura of a junkie. Tim Humphreys asks, greetings KMG, can Biden last 4 years? I don't think that Biden is going to last 4 years, but on the other hand, I do not think that he's going to be occupying the Oval Office on January 20th. I don't think so. I don't think that is going to happen. So let's do a roundup here of some political news before I move on, ever so reluctantly, to the next subject. I don't know, these stories have been pretty much all the same, have they not, for weeks now? We get people swearing out affidavits. We have videos. We have voting machines. But the response is it doesn't matter because Joe Biden won the election. He occupies the office of President-elect. Times Person of the Year reveals the West's stunning weakness under China's deadly threat. This is from Christopher Bedford at The Federalist. Time magazine's Person of the Year is an embarrassment designed to acknowledge and document men, women, and groups who've changed the world. Historically, it never promised to fill readers with warm and fuzzy feelings. Impact didn't require good intentions and didn't necessitate good results. Over much of its 93-year history, world changers like Winston Churchill, Mahatma Gandhi, Sun Mi-ling, and Adolf Hitler held the title. Apart from being very different people with different codes and different legacies, these people didn't win simply by virtue of not being the other guy. And for the lion's share of their lives, for good or evil, they interacted with the world outside the comforts of their own homes. In modern years, however, winners have moved away from the sometimes uncomfortable toward feel-gooders like Greta Thunberg, a child whose accomplishments peak at getting adults to applaud her tantrums. Greta has gone off on the leader of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, accusing her of being a climate emergency hypocrite. And I was looking at recent video of Thunberg, and there's something distinctly odd about her. I mean, there's lots of people who are bobbleheads, but there seems to be what could I call it? I can only call it arrested development. I mean, physically, but she must be not in such a good mood, because you notice the climate emergency has just vanished, because apparently we have a real emergency now. And instead of, I don't know, what was it, in 10, 30, 50 years? Although Gordon Brown, when he was Prime Minister of England, he said, the deadline for turning everything upside down is 5 years, I believe, and that 5 years expired, 5 years ago or more. But I suppose you only have to be right in that sort of prediction just once. And okay, you're a racist if you don't cancel black student loans. Oh, it's squad member Ayanna Pressley. She has a disfiguring skin condition which causes the hair on her face to fall out. And she wore a wig for quite some time, but then said that she was going to own this, or whatever it is people say in that situation. And so her head is as bald as a cue ball. But she does have the fake eyebrows. And of course, those enormous hoop earrings that black women seem to love so very much. John Yoo, who you might remember from George W. Bush's administration, he was one of the leaders of the president gets to do whatever he wants anywhere in the world because he's the president of the United States. Do you remember when people were arguing this about George W. Bush? He says Congress should decide the presidential election only if there is evidence of wide-scale vote fraud, says Professor John Yoo. Okay, we've already talked about voting machines in Michigan. Let's see what Scott Adams has to say. Scott Adams is very much on board with Biden being president-elect and becoming president in January. He wrote 10 hours ago, things we know for sure. Joe Biden ran for president because he fell for the Fine People hoax, the most debunked hoax in history. 50 past and current American intelligence professionals lied to the American public about Russian disinformation and Hunter Biden. The so-called news industry is mostly involved in propaganda and misinformation on political stories. We have no actual news business in America beyond the smaller outlets. China had God mode access to anything updated with SolarWinds software, including Dominion. China probably has lots of blackmail material on the Biden family, which means the guy in charge of fixing this situation is the last person on earth who could do it. And we are in a hot cyber war with China, and our incoming commander-in-chief thinks the news he sees on CNN is not real. This is not good. There was a rally in Washington, D.C. this weekend in favor of President Trump. And Rod Dreher was watching this on TV, and Rod Dreher was absolutely scandalized. What seems to me most scandalized is that you had various Christian denominations, and you had Jews on the stage, normal Jews plus Messianic Jews, the people who believe that the biggest problem with Christianity is that it doesn't have enough rules. And so these are all sorts of different people, a very diverse crowd, one might say, who are all there supporting Trump. And Rod Dreher does not like it. He does not like it at all. He takes shots at Eric Metaxas and John Zemirak. How does he refer to Zemirak? Catholic crackpot. Oh, Queens Catholic crackpot. Ooh, who else comes from Queens? That would be Donald Trump. Doesn't Rod Dreher come from nowhere, Louisiana? But he is going to tell us what kind of political activity is acceptable for Christians and for, I don't know, other religious believers. He finds it outrageous that the My Pillow fellow was there and that people were told that they had a coupon for 10% off and free shipping at My Pillow. I don't know. I suppose they want to raise some money to pay for this. A serious letter from a reader. I read your blog post on American Conservative about Eric Metaxas the other day with sadness, but I read your Twitter thread yesterday about the Jericho March with horror. I pray Eric will heed your warnings, come to his senses, and escape the snares that have been laid to him. The Bible is clear in its warnings about false prophets and that their claims of visions, dreams, and so forth are false. Jesus clearly taught us that his kingdom is not of this world and not to confuse his kingdom with the world's kingdom in his teaching about Caesar's face on the coin. And Solzhenitsyn got dragged into it. Dreher is making this argument that God would not ask you to do something which would not succeed. Well, Joan of Arc famously heard voices, and Joan of Arc was instructed by these voices that it was her duty to save France and install the Dauphin as king. Well, guess what? The Dauphin was installed as king, and Joan of Arc led French armies to glorious victories as she was eventually betrayed and convicted of heresy in a fixed trial, a trial which was reversed about 30 years later. But no, you see, Dreher is one of those people. It's the duty of Christians to stick their neck out for the guillotine, because apparently it would be wicked to resist. Resistance is futile, according to Rod Dreher. Oh, and by the way, now he's going to tell you the same story about how he got bullied in high school, or how his father was a redneck who didn't like him very much. I can't imagine why. Or why his late sister was a redneck that they didn't get along with. All of these stories serve only to burnish the reputation of Rod Dreher for wisdom and superiority. He really is a ridiculous character. In more church news, this is from Oliver Lane at Breitbart. Germany will enter a harsh coronavirus lockdown this week, with Angela Merkel's government warning residents to not go out for Christmas shopping, Christians to not attend church services, and pupils to stay away from school. The same thing has been going on since March. It just happens again and again and again. It's really like one of those horrific nested nightmares where you think that you're out of your bed and you've reached the light, and you turn on the light and the light has saved me, and then you realize to your horror that you're still asleep in bed. Can this go on? Can this go on for years? Can it? But as I say, I'll have more on that shortly. This is from Associated Press. More U.S. churches are committing to racism-linked reparations. The Episcopal Diocese of Texas acknowledges that its first bishop in 1859 was a slaveholder. An Episcopal church in New York City erects a plaque noting the building's creation in 1810 was made possible by wealth resulting from slavery. And the Minnesota Council of Churches cites a host of injustices, from mid-19th century atrocities against Native Americans to police killings of Black people, in launching a first-of-its-kind Truth and Reparations initiative engaging its 25-member denominations. I will point out what the late Sam Francis did, which pretty much ruined his career, certainly sank him at the Washington Times, that after, the Southern Baptists were groveling, There is no condemnation of slavery in either the Old or the New Testament. You can look all you want, you won't find it. And St. Paul was pretty clear about the duties of slaves. But the churches are being shaken down now. And oh no, one-time payments are not enough. The gibs have to keep coming forever. And again, in further religious news, this is a very strange story from the tablet. Again, the Jewish tablet and not the Catholic tablet. And it's about women networking and Israel versus Palestine, because apparently the question of Israel versus Palestine is the most important question in the world. Perhaps it's the only question, and everyone has to have an opinion on it. And woe to you if you have the wrong opinion. Emily Benedek wrote Litmus Tests Online. Girls Night Out is a secret Facebook group for women in Los Angeles. Secret because if you search for it online, you won't find it. Secret because if you want to be a member, you must be invited. Created by USC Communications grad as a virtual sorority house and networking node for the sprawling megalopolis. In 2011, it has grown to more than 30,000 members. GNO is a place to share social news, recommendations about restaurants and nail salons, and also to talk about politics or relationships or show business. It's a place to feel safe with no women around, said one GNO member. It also offers valuable work opportunities for LA's large freelance population. By commenting on threads, fitness trainers, chefs, makeup artists, and the like can prove their bona fides, and if they get lucky, get new clients. Artists can sell their wares, and PR pros can announce hot new openings and pop-up stores. I was told this is the spot where everything happens, said a 28-year-old actress. Everyone's in it, and they have a subgroup called GNO Casting, on which she learns about auditions. It's also the perfect gateway drug to the dream of going viral. I've seen a girl make a random post about macrame, and suddenly she has like 30,000 posts, and her business is popping. GNO's commercial promise is so great that a nutritionist who in 3 years of membership had not gotten a single client from the site still holds out hope. All you need is one person, and they can tell their friends. She told me all you need is one. GNO's numbers grew, and the reach of the network multiplied until 2020. After hundreds of Black Lives Matter protests erupt statewide following the death of George Floyd in police custody in Minneapolis, GNO decided to increase its commitment to the BLM movement. Once the protests started happening, people posted about how to get involved, organizations to support where the protests would be, said another member. The group also tried to add administrators and moderators who were BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Moderators help decide if posts comply with the rules of the group and Facebook's community standards, and they have the power to admit and boot members. Admins do the same, but have the additional power of adding or booting admins or moderators. On August the 27th, a young Jewish group member saw a sign hanging over the heavily trafficked 401 freeway in LA said, "The Jews want a race war." It upset her, and she added in a GNO post, she asked what others thought of it. A member suggested some Jewish representation was also needed in the group after noticing some fishy anti-Semitic stuff. At first, the comments responding to this suggestion were positive. Then, on August 29th, a member posted, "I feel that the Jewish admin who is appointed must also acknowledge the occupation of Palestine." Yeah, because that's what you want in a networking group. Let's get in it about Israel versus Palestine. All hell broke loose. Within hours, every Jewish member who had tried to explain why a litmus test for a good Jew was anti-Semitic was thrown out. Every Jewish member who asked why an American Jew should have an opinion on a foreign matter was expelled. Anyone who made a comment supporting Israel, explaining the history of Israel, who liked such a comment, disappeared. Said one Jewish member who was not expelled, "It was all over so fast that if I hadn't personally known one of the girls who was thrown out, I wouldn't have known anything that happened. and the 29,990 other people have no idea those women have been kicked out. And the details, oh, okay, this is good. One of the members who was severed from the group, a Korean-American Jewish woman named Skylar Cutler, was so incensed that she contacted Tablet with her story. The swiftness with which the Jewish women were kicked out without any explanation, she wrote, was a shocking and a moment of realization that anti-Semitism is now mainstream. Even though the Jewish women who spoke out were ethnic Korean, not white, Mizrahi, not white, Sephardi, not white, and Ashkenazi, not white, we were collectively dismissed and branded as white racist bad Jews who were in support of oppressing the brown and black Palestinians. It's long been my opinion that Ashkenazi Jews are white, and the surveys tell us that they overwhelmingly believe themselves to be white. But this story teaches a lesson. We've seen lots of similar stories in recent years that using your status as a Jew to demand certain privileges, particularly in political quarrels, it doesn't work anymore. It simply doesn't work. Now, the author of this article, neglected to identify the one woman who was responsible in the main for kicking out all these Jewish members. And here's a paragraph. With the absolute power she seized and zealously guarded, members say a group as large as GNO needs 5 to 10 admins and moderators to properly handle all the posts. The admin had her way, and she reveled in her accomplishment. A few weeks later, she tweeted, quote, #PSA, the only people complaining about cancel culture are the white people whose bullshit is no longer being tolerated. Keep calling them out. She ended up getting booted herself. But even though the reporter did not identify this woman, I managed to figure out who she was simply by doing a Twitter search for the words that were quoted. And the woman is called Ashley Haynes. She's an actress. She's also Courtney on 20s, which is the new series by Lena Waithe. And I wouldn't have expected that somehow, but there you go. There is no such thing as cancel culture, should be retweeted. It is an accountability culture. Gatekeepers were allowed to get away with the isms phobias until social media, until you believe your privilege flows for such behavior, unless you believe your privilege allows for such behavior. If not, stop whining and correct called out behavior. Easy peasy. Really? You want to talk about accountability? I don't think you do. I really don't think you do, because genuine accountability becomes an issue. A lot of people are going to find themselves being asked a lot of uncomfortable questions. And, what happened in 2020? So a black fellow, a career criminal, died in police custody. And as a result, American cities have to be looted and burned. And anyone who is not in favor of this, anyone who doesn't literally take the knee, was a wicked person. An amusing piece by someone called Lamprey Milt on Ryan Landry's publication, The American Sun. Seen but not seen. Everyone is lying so much to be connected in America, and the tragedy is everyone is missing one another, not realizing that we are falling stars and fading fast. I spent the best years of my life living in a third world country. Something was electrifying in the air living in the country's capital. The place was alive, young, and for the most part, happy. I woke up quite excited about what will come of the day, since something unique would always happen despite daily routines. I recall the ease of making acquaintances, both natives and foreigners, without it being under the guise of financial gain. The environment was not like that of the sterilized West, where we are no more than well-mannered prisoners of war. Being back in the US, I do what I can to replicate my general excitement about life, but there's so many elements missing to produce sparks. The most significant aspect I realized that's missing is the general pleasantry of talking to, let alone look at, the opposite sex. I wasn't in the United States when social media took off, so I basically paused my life from when I left to when I returned. There's been a drastic transformation of communicating where it's now all in the realm of apps, texting, social media, and the internet. I thought getting a woman's number was a lock on going on a date. At least this was the case in 2009. But now, getting someone's number is just a means to be worthy of that person's attention and to be redirected to their social media account. The never ending need to be seen in images, attention, adulation, and affirmation has left me quite nauseated, and I've boiled the question down to social collapse due to over socialization. There's a general ambivalence that permeates throughout the society as social edicts are not well defined. Is it cool to be bisexual? Shouldn't I be looking for a spouse at my age? I'm still young, aren't I? Now is a good time to send a dick pic, right? A joke amongst expats is when you're here, you can be whomever you want to be, meaning that no one knows who you are when you arrive in a new country. You can make up your past, which was a bit of a laugh considering I've heard some ludicrous personal histories of others, yachts in Monte Carlo or rebel fighting with the United Wa State Army. In the online world, the same rule applies. You can use filters, take photos of goods you don't possess, lie about previous relationships, and burn every bridge where you originated from. Communication is a skill one can lose rapidly the less he or she interacts with the world outside. People's linguistic skills become anthropic, and the phone becomes the crutch. The smartphone has become a coping device, an adult pacifier, flapper binky, or one person feels threatened by their surroundings. They would rigidly clutch the phone in a ritualistic manner. Self-protection becomes an overriding imperative. If I don't see them, they don't exist. What has replaced linguistics is the skill to be witnessed. Either you stand out or left out, and the more outlandish, the more one notices. We have separate lives online, hiding behind an avatar and trite images, but the stories are untold because the story is the photos. Social media and dating apps are based on aesthetics and pure optics, a form of self-promotion through winning images such as a pilgrimage to Santorini, Dubai yachts, extravagant nights out. We all project fantasy and illusion online where one must be in it to win it. Being a happy, humble hermit is frowned upon in a hyper-consumption culture. Where does the illusion come from? It's actually from the banality of one's work and now for millions being on the dole. To break away from reality, you must put on a show. It's merely daydreaming. People seek depth, which can't be denied, and it's nowhere to found because neoliberalism's religion is consumerism. Goods provide you your value and identity in the sexual marketplace. It's now about who has the most toys are the winners. To get the junk, you need to sell the image or spectacle, and you have no means of getting the junk, pop oxycodone, and dream away. The disparity between the imaginary ideal and reality gives rise to a detachment that dulls reality's pains. This is called the grandiosity gap, where extravagant expression is now a sign of cultural decay. The haughtiness, exhibitionism, and omnipotence are signs of primitive psychological defense mechanisms. You preserve your fantasy world of you being bougie with avocado toast, glamour zoning, or taking your lifted Jeep off the road, really showing everyone, no one, how fulfilling of a life you have. This produces a negative feedback loop where you compete with yourself, your previous uploads of snaps, memes, and spectacles. She has little interest in his life and is quickly bored when the man discusses it, as it takes quite a bit to impress her, as she's been there, done that. She is insincere in passing and chortle, unaware of how ordinary she is because no one would dare utter such blasphemy. Underneath it all is definitely shame and the paralyzing fear of being ordinary. He sees the boilerplate, thoughtistic images and suffers status anxiety as he cannot provide endless summer, perpetual Disney dreams. So he objectifies her like a Christmas ornament, a tantalization cuckoldry. And from here, we are presented with a social dilemma. If neither sexes can enjoy each other's companionship or have some sort of commonality because she's a vegan and he likes to go fishing, you might as well Venmo her some money for a few naked pictures and become one of her pay pigs. In a poor country, men pimp out young women. When young women eagerly pimp themselves out, the country is essentially dead. Young men have chaotic sexual impulses and low self-esteem, which initiates the commodification of relationships. It seems the word shallow has completely dropped out of the English vernacular. Most men who have started questioning the dichotomy between the two sexes and know a bit about the 80-20 rule know about ghosting. Using social media for dating is a vicious form of depersonalization. Ghosting is a form of passive-aggressive behavior as feelings of frustration or alienation set in on the victim. You said what? Delete. You didn't respond fast enough? Vanished. What did I do? Where did he or she go? When people finally meet face-to-face, people's intentions are often ambiguous and personal boundaries are often violated. It's easier to disappear than to explain to the other why they are not interested. Repeated fears of abandonment eventually desensitize individuals where empathy is considered a chore. It's better to think I can have intimacy than to actually find out, nor do I want this person realizing I'm ordinary. Perhaps string them along, having them think of innocent gestures or texts as subliminal messages. This gives rise to projective identification. Social media means having access to individuals anywhere on earth, which exacerbates the disposability of oneself. A debauched motodop from Jakarta can now send some cash to an e-thought, so long as he catches some solid 4G rays, which is something unprecedented. The general accessibility to everyone makes it easier to go unnoticed or being able to keep certain aspects of a person's life hidden versus someone you went to high school with. The close proximity makes it much harder to disappear as word spreads on the type of person you are or the likelihood of bumping into one another. If you're the village bicycle, guys know to hit it and quit it. If you have commitment issues, the better suited and stable women know to stay away. The average individual must understand that the people you grew up around, sharing the same ethnicity, church, linguistics, would make the best mate like the boy next door. But in reality, the girl next door actually loathes him as he is a reminder of themselves, fear of ordinary, the endless search and need for the exotic. A bride from Brazil or a Kuwaiti oil tycoon groom, I'm hyperbolic, is part of the daydream believer's mindset, the constant indulging of fiction where fantasy becomes so detached from reality. When you try to reel it back in, you realize you're in your own wonderland based on your own creation, leading to depression. All major dating apps, Tinder, Match, Bumble, Hinge, Plenty of Fish, and OkCupid, are owned by the Match Group, a part of the multinational Interactive Corp. Now, at the end of 2020, we're going out and meeting someone is all but gone. We are being nudged into using these monolithic platforms, and for all we know, are probably engaging in a nefarious agenda. They haven't interpolated the psyche of humans' attention deficits and narcissism via imagery. Panic sets in on millennials now in their 30s with a fear of missing out on finding a significant other. They will cling to the past as we broach the twilight of abundance, and they will search for the past cornucopia frantically, underprepared and not knowing what the future holds. People will be discarded at breakneck speeds and will be quickly replaced, hyperconsumption, and will never be content with the status quo as the better catch is right around the corner. Sadly, nobody lives up to another's expectation. After being discarded by men, she was lusting after, she resigns and paints a broad brush that all men are the same. He holds on to a false hope that she is out there, but there's no unicorn on the horizon. After repeated failures, he becomes a porn-addicted hermit and apathetic to everything and everyone. When you put all of this into place, your attempt to seek a relationship is in competition with social media. Today's dating scene of ambiguity has led to a generation of misguided souls and humanity's obsession with escapism. It's a big world out there. The author gets it exactly right. Before social media, well, first the internet and then social media, who were women competing with? Well, they might be competing with members of their own family, sisters, say. competing with other women at school or university, competing with other women in the workplace. Now, essentially, they are competing with every other woman on earth, which drives a great many of them crazy. But it also has the other effect, the e-thought effect, that yes, I'm so gorgeous, I'm so sexy. Yes, I want to be adored. And many pitiful men make the mistake of thinking there's anything to be gained by letting some thoroughly ordinary woman know that she is some sort of exemplar. And this leads to the phenomenon of trading up. Not all that long ago, people didn't really meet all that many different people in their lives. Well, now they don't meet any people in their lives, essentially, but they have virtual meetings with many, many, many other people, and, keep swiping, keep swiping, keep swiping, keep swiping. And after it goes south, you can always trade up, until you hit the wall, of course. But, the creative use of filters maybe can keep a woman going for another 5 or 10 years. Let's see what the chat has to say. Okay. Tinder flamed out, enter the bubble. Oh, hi, Lamprey Melt. Thank you. Congratulations on that story. I quite enjoyed it. Appreciate your your intuition on these matters. Halper says, I can imagine Lash making these observations if he were alive. Well, I remember in one of his books written in 1977, he was talking about the results of what they call child-centered education, and he came to the conclusion that it was an absolute disaster because the result were people who were, one would associate with dictatorships rather than democratic societies. And of course, we've seen this with the COVID-19 panic. This fierce quest for authenticity. I have to be my authentic self. What is your authentic self? Anyway, because you seem to have spent a great deal of time and money creating a persona, or perhaps various personas. The late 30s was the ideal time to be born, says Brandon Smith. Let's see, if you were born in 1940, you had been 30 years old in 1970. Yeah. Isn't that where we get all those PBS documentaries? Let's talk about the glorious 1960s again. Yeah, fight the power. Many of these I've seen. It's completely unavoidable. Hickma Warrior says, I saw BLM banners at a Sotheby's outlet today. Surreal irony. Slavic Orthodoxy is the last refuge from pause for Christians. Bob Paxton says, my Slavic bride was a Catholic. Well, yeah, there's a lot of them there, no question about it. One of the things that struck me about millennials, and perhaps this is even worse amongst the Zoomers, is the self-diagnosis. Oh, so you're autistic, are you? Oh, you have ADHD as well? And you have OCD as well? And you're also depressed? Why would telling me any of these things make me like you anymore? Or not, in fact, fear for my own safety? But you got to be interesting. And I guess it's easy to be interesting by being crazy or pretending to be crazy. Dreyer seems like a snob, says Hickma Warrior. He's constantly carrying on about craft brews. It's cringe. It is absolute cringe. Your craft brews, eh? Anyone who has the money can buy that stuff. That's the whole point. You know, it's really the whole point of this. Oh no, but look at my craft beer. But I don't know. Dreyer seems a deeply, deeply unhappy man. What on earth is he still carrying on his father? You know, things his father said to him 30 years ago or whatever. It's, you know, I'll show you, Dad. I'll show you, sis. He's just so condescending to these people. Let's see. No one is supposed to be well adjusted to hell, says Brandon Smith. YT, people seem to almost brag about their mental issues these days. No sense of privacy. You know, there's a question of what Marshall McLuhan said you call charisma. You define charisma as being like a lot of other people. And that leads to the well-known phenomenon that the more well-defined a person is, the less charisma he has. Now, if you're looking at, say, a millennial woman who, you know, has tattoos, piercings, and claims to suffer from all manner of maladies, on the one hand, there are going to be some men who are terribly attracted to this because of the belief that, well, you know, they're signifiers of promiscuity. On the other hand, the much larger pool of men is going to be frightened off by this. But, you know, again, so many of these things that they're just signifiers. And what they signify is, I will do it on the first date. Chogokin666 said, I said rarefied, but I should say refined, as the more competition they seem to have, the more self-important is their aspect. Emma Nimpton says, depression is a normal response to the world today. Yeah, I suppose so. You could go the other route, you know, mockery. Mockery is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. OnlyFans. Yes, I've seen this. I thought I understood OnlyFans, that it was, you know, women sold mucky pictures of themselves to strangers, and strangers who thought that somehow they were going to become friends, perhaps intimate friends, sexual friends with these women. But now I find out it is just a fantastic marketing tool. Oh, it's not about sex? No, apparently there are entertainers who have OnlyFans accounts. Wait, you're paying money, extra money, you know, not for some sort of entertainment product, like a downloaded song or a DVD or a Blu-ray or whatever, but you get all this stuff for free in, you know, People magazine and the gossip columns, or just in the Daily Mail. These people are spilling their guts about what their life is like, and most of it is made up, okay? Hello to Professor Pohl. Brandon Smith says, as a Gen Xer, Boomer versus Millennial is all kinds of poetic justice in both directions. Picasso 88, as a Gen Xer, I find millennials' obsession with Harry Potter and spandex movies pathetic. It's like Harry Potter is the only book they've ever read. Yeah, I saw this. I know this generation. First the books, then the movies, and then it becomes a real cult. And you see the hysteria with J.K. Rowling and what she had to say about transsexuals, or the most militant of them, I suppose, that she's not allowed to do this. Okay, so you bought a bunch of books, saw a bunch of movies, and you paid for this, presumably your parents paid for it. J.K. Rowling can say whatever she wants, and I really have to give her credit for this, because apparently she has made $1 billion in her career, and so that means you can do whatever you want, pretty much. You don't have to grovel like Tiger Woods did after he was caught out. And she has maintained her independence, which is admirable, wholly admirable. I don't really care for her political opinions very much. But she was not going to be bullied by a bunch of creeps. This is a weird story. Matthew Morrison, was he in Glee? Let me check this out here. I get this. Not that I ever saw Glee. I may have seen some clips. Yes, he was on Glee. There is something. Have you noticed this? That everyone associated with that show is dead now, or severely damaged. This is from Yahoo. During Wednesday's Dr. Seuss The Grinch musical, viewers were treated to plenty of bright colors, joyous singing, and of course, festive holiday cheer. Matthew Morrison played the legendary Grinch, and while his performance had all the comedy and crankiness that fans have come to expect from the character, it also had a certain je ne sais quoi that left some viewers uncomfortable. In an Entertainment Weekly interview leading up to the premiere, Morrison said his Grinch was inspired by Joaquin Phoenix. I didn't want the Grinch to be a good doctor, he said. I took a lot from Joaquin Phoenix's performance in Joker. While Morrison's Grinch was unique, many viewers complained on social media that it was also too sexual. Morrison did quite a bit of heavy breathing, moaning, and fourth wall breaking, plus the occasional hip thrust. Someone had commented on Twitter, I'm literally going to need to see my therapist after watching Matthew Morrison put so much sexual energy into the Grinch. Something about, the Grinch Live was Matthew Morrison moaning for and occasionally whipping Boo Boo Stewart for 2 hours. I've never felt so uncomfortable in my life. Well, without getting too specific, people who sexualize everything, even children's stories, there's a fairly good bet these people were sexually abused as children. Have you ever seen the Community parody of Glee? It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. We're going to make it to regionals. What are regionals? Why do people keep talking about regionals? And of course, Danny Pudi and Donald Glover's Baby Boomer Santa. Yes, appealing to Chevy Chase's The Boomers, well-known historical narcissism, where Annie says to him, well, your generation invented music. She's being wholly insincere. And Chevy Chase says, well, not really invented, perfected, maybe. Hi, Kevin, great show. Who wrote the essay on online dating? It is by Lamprey Melt, who was in our very chat, or was a few minutes ago, and can be found at The American Sun, which is an online publication. Okay, what do we got here? Oh, yeah, I came across this by accident. Kevin Smith was trending, and I do not like Kevin Smith, to put it mildly. That second movie was called Mallrats. That movie was just so appalling. I thought, how they're not going to allow him to make a movie after this one. Nope, but he was allowed to make many more movies. I think he does better now with his podcasts and cable shows than movies. But okay, Stand Up to Cancer special edition of Fat Man Beyond Live. That's what his YouTube show is called, Stand Up to Cancer. Yes, take that, cancer. Yeah, you're going to be smiling out of the other side of your face when we're through with you. I first started noticing this, about 10 years ago, and there's an organization, essentially the message is the same, Stand Up to Cancer, but they use a much ruder word. Cancer is not sentient. It cannot be coerced. It cannot be browbeaten. It has no sense of shame or embarrassment, much like COVID-19. But this pathetic fallacy, which I complained with regard to COVID-19, it was there present regarding cancer. It's been there for a long time. People always die, if they die of cancer, after a courageous battle with cancer. I suppose it's not really battle, though, is it? And there was a famous story in The Onion, back when The Onion used to be funny. I'll read some of it. It goes back to 1999. That is a long way back. On January 26, just 4 days after visiting the doctor for what he thought was severe indigestion or maybe an ulcer, Russ Kunkel got the dreaded news. A malignant Fissites tumor had metastasized between his stomach and liver. It was cancer. Right then and there, faced with the prospect of a life-threatening disease, the 34-year-old Florissant, Missouri husband and father of three drew a deep breath and made a firm resolution to himself. I am not going to fight this. I am a dead man. On February 20th, less than a month after he was first diagnosed, Kunkel died following a brief, cowardly battle with stomach cancer. Most people, when they find out they've got something terrible like this, dig deep down inside and tap into some tremendous well of courage and strength they never knew they had, said Judith Kunkel, Russ's wife of 11 years. Not Russ. The moment he found out he had cancer, he curled up into a fetal ball and sobbed uncontrollably for 3 straight weeks. Said Judith, I can still remember Russ's last words. Oh God, I'm going to die. Why, God? Why? Why me? Why not someone else? According to Russ's personal physician, Dr. James Wolpert, the type of cancer Russ had generally takes at least 4 months to advance to the terminal stage, but because of what he described as a remarkable lack of fighting spirit, the disease consumed him in less than 1. It's rare that you see someone give up that quickly and completely, Wolpert said. Cancer is a powerful disease, but most people can at the very least delay the spread of it by maintaining a positive attitude, outlook, and mental attitude. This, however, was not the case with Russ. Russ's friends and acquaintances saw that same lack of fighting spirit. Russ did not go quietly, that's for sure, said longtime friend Bobby Dwyer. He did a tremendous amount of screaming. During the 3 days he spent at work before the pain got too bad, I saw a very different Russ, said Arnold Tolliver, a co-worker at the Florissant electronics store where Russ had been employed for the past 6 years. He was always telling the customers how tragic it was that he wouldn't outlive his kids, reminding me that every day is a gift cruelly torn from his fingers, and grabbing anybody by the shirt and screaming into their face that he didn't want to die. In those final days, like so many who realize their day of reckoning is near, Russ Kunkel turned to a higher power. Russ came to me in his time of need, said Pastor Charles Byrne of the Holy Christ Almighty Lutheran Church. But when I tried to comfort him by saying he would be with God soon, he only stopped bawling long enough to say, F God, there is no God. I had to get a couple of acolytes to help me pry him out from underneath the pews. It goes on a little longer, but that was really quite to the point. Because there are well-known stories, we've known people ourselves, of people who've had, courageous battles with cancer. But that's not everyone. In any event, who are you fighting? You're not fighting another person. Cancer is indifferent to your feelings, just as COVID-19 is indifferent to our feelings. Michael Fumento. This is from the American Institute for Economic Research. When do we start coming out of the COVID-19 mass hysteria? Men go mad in herds while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. So wrote Scottish journalist Charles Mackay in his 1841 book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, which for good reason to this day remains in print. The COVID-19 hysteria, scientifically called mass psychogenic illness, that began in March has yet to peak. And if some have it their way, it will continue indefinitely, merely going, in medical terminology, from epidemic to endemic. That is, it will never fully go away no matter what. We apparently finally have some medicines that work, with countless more being tested. Doctors have gotten better at applying treatments. Vaccines are being administered in what is by far record time. And yet the media and public health community onslaught shows absolutely no sign of abating. We have heard White House COVID-19 task force member Dr. Deborah Birx claim this is not just the worst public health event. This is the worst event that this country will face, not just from a public health side. Oi. This even as we're now hearing the mainstream media, led by cult figure Dr. Anthony Fauci, say that the vaccinations now being rolled out don't mean the masks can come off. Start with the second first. We are left wondering, when do the masks come off? When do the other measures end if it's independent of vaccinations? Remember that originally lockdowns and masking were supposed to be extremely temporary, as little as 15 days to flatten the curve. And it was supposed to be a one-time flattening, but it didn't work out that way. Once the original goal was achieved, the posts were moved, and nobody told us to where. It's like literal goalposts. If not the 0-yard line, then any other goal is arbitrary, except for one. That's total elimination of the disease. That may be close to impossible and incredibly expensive to even try, but like eliminating all carbon emissions in a decade, it is a goal. The problem, of course, is that we never eliminated an airborne virus by quarantining healthy people, and there's no scientific breakthrough that has made that any more possible now than it's ever been. For example, the masks virtually everyone is using, even first-liners, are no better than what some people used during the Spanish flu a century ago. Social distancing dividers at various businesses and schools are just like the sneeze guards at the local buffet. Contact tracing with the use of mobile devices has been hailed as a savior of sorts and perhaps can be of help, albeit at the expense of invading privacy. At least it's targeted, right? Well, no. It seems to be of limited efficacy without distancing. So again, when do the masks come off? Can we ever return to pre-COVID life, or is the answer contained in the term new normal? That is, at least until COVID-19 is eliminated, which took 25 years with a smallpox vaccine. By the way, the polio eradication program has a target date of 2005. That's not a typo. And now it's being threatened by a shift of resources to, you guessed it, COVID-19. When is it okay to sit next to another human being or to be touched again without being guilt-tripped or fined and jailed? It doesn't seem an unreasonable query, but nobody at the press conference is dazzled by the glow of Fauci's halo ever thinks to think. As for Burke's claim, repeated by CDC Director Robert Redfield, she's simply off her rocker or simply lying. There's no third option. In 1918 to 19, the so-called Spanish flu swept through the world, killing, adjusted to today's population, 325 to 430 million. These people died of the flu, not with. And notes the CDC, in direct contrast with coronavirus, the high mortality in healthy people, including those in the 20 to 40 year age group, was a unique feature of this pandemic. At the same time, the world was suffering the torment of World War I, perhaps 20 million deaths, not to mention the horrific smallpox and vastly higher rates than today of malaria, yellow fever, dengue, measles, mumps, rubella, and a host of other lethal diseases against which there wasn't any treatment. Remember that President Calvin Coolidge's son died of infection from a blister in 1924. No antibiotics. As for Time's worst ever year cover, perhaps as a matter of perspective, is exemplified in the satirical term first world problem, which to a great extent is what COVID-19 is. Consider that all those comorbidities tied to higher mortality are related to the cultures of advanced societies, essentially bad diet, sedentary lifestyles, and simply living longer. COVID this year could represent a loss of less than 1/1000th of the population's remaining years to live, according to one published analysis. Imagine throwing a brick into an Olympic-sized pool and trying to measure a rise in the water line. Meanwhile, about 2.2 million children die alone each and every year in poor countries from diarrhea, according to the CDC. That's last year, this year, and next year as well, assuming coronavirus doesn't drain anti-diarrheal efforts, which apparently it is. No COVID-19 shibboleth is more disingenuous that all lives matter. Perhaps, but obviously some lives matter more than most. What we clearly have is a pandemic of self-absorption, part and parcel to mass psychogenic illness. At some point, hopefully, we will feel the shame of the Salem witch hunters and all those who aided and abetted them, those in the courts who squirmed and screamed every time a suspect witch was questioned. Maybe we'll shun the current panic mongers as those people were later shunned. But for now, it's full-bore hysteria, and there's no end in sight. It's more for that reason that indeed 2020 has been a very bad year. So yes, shutdowns. We need more shutdowns. Shutdowns 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. They didn't work. But shutdown 6, 6 time is a charm. This is from Breitbart. Amy Furr. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said Monday the city may soon face additional restrictions and could go back to a total shutdown. There's a potential of having to do a full pause, a full shutdown in the coming weeks because we can't let this kind of momentum go, he said during an interview on CNN. We're seeing the kind of level of infection with the coronavirus we haven't seen since May, and we've got to stop that momentum or else our hospital system will be threatened. Well, if you're going to continue to drag people into hospitals to be treated with remdesivir or whatever, when these people can be treated at home because you get more money for it that way, no, hospitals are not going to be a problem. Last week, Governor Andrew Cuomo said he would stop all indoor dining in New York City, even though contact tracing does show restaurants as being a primary source, does not show restaurants as being a primary source of coronavirus transmission. Yeah. And yeah, I just see it. I've seen it in the last couple of days. Oh, some famous New York eatery closed after all these years. Oh, so the hospitality industry in New York City is going to be destroyed, apparently. And there's nothing that can be done. There's nothing that can be done. If you want hysteria, here's a good one. This is from The Hill. Is this the end of cities in America? Bum, bum, bum. This is the year that officially ended the boom of cities that started in the 1990s. The mirage of cities buffeted by white-collar jobs and supported by wealthy citizens willing to take on just one more tax increase is officially kaput. It is easy to blame the deluge on the coronavirus, but in reality, a unique combination of factors heralded the end of growth in places like New York City, while introducing population booms in medium-sized cities and suburbs across specific regions of the country. Significant populations of each social class decided it was no longer worth living in major metropolitan areas. What developed this year is a cascade of residents leaving large cities and blue states. Among the biggest losers this year in terms of total population loss were New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and the District of Columbia. New York lost at least 300,000 residents this year. San Francisco saw 90,000 postal changes of address out of the city, while its median apartment rent took a nosedive of 20% in 2020. Los Angeles recorded more than 25,000 moves out of the city, while Chicago logged over 20. Even the District of Columbia lost 15,000 residents. Now, this is interesting, and I'm thinking about this with regard to, say, Canadian cities. Justin Trudeau has ramped up immigration to historic highs, over 1.2 million people for the next 3 years. Keep in mind, Canada has a population of only 38 million, so that is well over 1% a year. There's no jobs for these people. And if people are fleeing the cities because they're so expensive and you could work remotely, there's a possibility, it seems to me, that these cities could go downhill in a real hurry because the only people living in the cities would be the people who didn't have the money or the good sense to not live in the city. Vancouver, where I was raised and spent most of my life, it had become, by the 1990s or perhaps the early 2000s, a place rather like San Francisco or Aspen, Colorado. That is to say, only the rich and the destitute live there now. Middle class, it simply doesn't exist in Vancouver, a place where even in the suburbs, 1.5 million for a house, 2 million for a house. But we're dumping all of these people from China and India and Somalia and, Ethiopia now? All of these places being dumped in Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. And I suppose these, they could become hellholes in a real hurry. Let's see. Is London on its way to Tier 3? Jonathan Barr at Lockdown Skeptics. I sometimes get the impression that, well, it's not fair. All these other places in Britain get to be Tier 3. How come we're not totally shut down? Monkey see, monkey do. And, okay. Oh, and this is very funny. Someone had made a mural in the style of the Tim Burton poster, Lockdown 2, The Nightmare Before Christmas. And how many people are really dying of COVID-19? A Lockdown Skeptics regular, Guy de la Bédoire, has done a cracking piece of analysis of deaths in week 48, the week ending November 27th. Guy used to be a statistician in a former life, and he's used those skills to put some of the government's alarmist data into perspective. He points out that comparing deaths in England and Wales in week 48 to the 5-year average and concluding that they are alarmingly high is misleading. Why? Because the population of England and Wales has increased and aged in the past 5 years. So you would expect deaths in week 48 to be higher than previous years as a matter of course. This year, there were 12,456 deaths in England and Wales in week 48. Sounds like a lot, right? But Guy calculates that if you compare deaths this year to deaths in week 48 in the previous 10 years and allow for population growth, and the fact that deaths are increasing at a rate of 1.2% per annum, the number of deaths this year absent COVID should have been 11,145. But the ONS would have us believe that 3,040 of the 12,456 registered deaths in week 48 were due to COVID, implying that if it had not been for the dreaded lurgy, only 9,416 people would have died. Guy thinks that's implausible. Well, argue the fact. What's the old saying, the old legal saying? If you're right on the facts, you argue the facts. If you're right on the law, you argue the law. If you're right on neither the facts nor the law, you pound on the table. And this is what we're seeing now. And we saw a lot of table pounding about the so-called climate emergency or climate extinction. But no, we must, or what, the seas are going to boil, that the earth is going to be terraformed into Venus. Come on, you don't really believe that, do you? From The Spectator on Monday, Minister James Cleverly would not say if immunity cards or passports were on the table as he toured the broadcast studios in the morning. Could the confusion lie in the plans the government has to issue passports for those who have tested negative for the disease instead? The government's intentions on COVID-19 passports may, in any case, end up being overtaken by the country at large. A reader writes, I noticed a comment in the current newsletter of a small hotel in Scotland offering wildlife holidays where you've stayed on occasion in the days pre-COVID-19. Should a vaccination program be rolled out in the next few months, then it is likely we will require all guests to have been vaccinated before arrival, it says. I fear that whatever the science and whatever government might say, we're all going to be forced inexorably into a situation where vaccination certificates de facto, if not de jure, become necessary to lead even a reasonable life in the months or years to come. Oh, and Bill Gates predicts that the truest epidemiologist predicts that even with the mass rollout of COVID vaccines, it is still sadly appropriate for bars and restaurants to be closed for the next 4 to 6 months. The Sydney Morning Herald has a report on a tragic consequence of the state of Victoria's response to the coronavirus. The COVID-19 pandemic and Victoria's protracted lockdown to contain the virus has triggered a wave of destructive eating disorders in teenagers and young adults, with the demand for treatment overwhelming available services and spilling into hospital wards and emergency rooms. Christine Morgan, the chief executive of the National Mental Health Commission, who advises the Prime Minister on suicide prevention, said that the data provided by hospitals and support services showed a national surge of between 25 and 50% in presentations for eating disorders across the public health system. In Victoria, the situation is so dire that some of Melbourne's leading private practices specializing in eating disorders have been forced to close their doors to new patients. And no end in sight. I don't know, I thought that this might happen because, Joe Biden, he holds the office of the president-elect, so therefore you can't blame Trump anymore. So COVID-19 is going to go away. We have vaccines, but these things take on a life of their own. Alex Berenson says, here's a CDC on the Pfizer's vaccine safety. About 9% of vaccine recipients versus 2% of placebo recipients recorded grade 3 or greater reactions. CDC estimated the vaccine would prevent 9 cases of COVID per 1,000 people and cause 68 more severe reactions. By the way, the shares in BioNTech, Pfizer's partner in the vaccine, fell 15%. And PPE fell 5%. I wonder if big investors and analysts took a look at the side effect data and realized that science by press release had once again told less than the full story. I can just see this happening. I don't know. I don't think I want to get this vaccination. What are you, some kind of sissy? Oh, well, I'm the sissy now? For months, people have been staring daggers at me because I'm walking down the street and pass by someone and they notice that I have gray hair. And I'm the sissy now because I do not want to take an experimental vaccine, which is not, in the event, actually a vaccine. Follow-up questions in advance. Why did over 75 patients make up less than 5% of all vaccination enrollees, considering they represent 60 to 80% of the people who die with or from COVID? And why were enrollees so much healthier than most people who become seriously ill or die from COVID? Did you make an effort to come up with a population more likely to become sick and find that doing so was impossible because of time constraints or other factors? Or did you not try? Are you concerned about the mismatch? If not, why not? Oh, I see. Ida Bay Wells, aka Hannah Jones, jumped in. Well, as journalists, context always matters, and it matters particularly when some folks are trying to politicize these figures by attributing them to BLM protests and calls to defund the police. This would be super spreader events. Yes, so dangerous when people report facts. Am I right in Hannah Jones? Don't worry, you can always make them disappear later. And finally, from Alex Berenson, I can't find in either the FDA brief or Pfizer's protocol the PCR cycle threshold used to confirm cases. Has anyone seen it? Does anyone know anything about those 3,410 suspected but unconfirmed cases that would have resulted in a null finding if they had been confirmed? That's the bottom line, folks. Lots of proof it reduces spread. No proof it prevents hospitalizations, much less deaths. Lots of proof it causes severe short-term reactions, especially in younger people. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. So that is the show for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. What's scheduled for coming up on the Book Club and Theater Thursday? This schedule may be knocked for a loop and soon, because it seems I do not have, in fact, till the 28th of this month to leave here. I may have to leave by as early as the end of the week, which is going to mess up the sched. But the next movie I will be talking about will be John Ford's Three Godfathers from 1948. And the next book I will be talking about is a collected poetry by Roy Campbell. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I tremendously appreciated at this time, because I got to clear out and move to a new place. And as you know, every time one moves, one has to leave things behind, or things are lost or forgotten, and you end up buying a whole bunch of stuff that you had already. But my PayPal account is Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send a donation to me via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with my traditional benediction in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and readers, manage to find a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.